Our session today is Defense Against the Dark Arts, writing secure WordPress plugins and themes. So my name is Jonathan Brinley. I will be your Defense Against the Dark Arts professor here today. And just a little about me. I've been building with WordPress since about 2005. I remember playing with version 1.5. That was fun. And I've been doing this professionally since 2007 when I founded Flightless with my wife Stephanie. And since 2010, I have been working with Modern Tribe. We've been building some popular plugins like our events calendar, and then I also work with them on a lot of client sites. In my job with Modern Tribe, I review a lot of code, both from within our own team and then third-party plugins that we're going to be using on our client sites. And every time I look over some code, there's some key things that I think about. And first of all, does it do what we need it to do, of course? Second, is this going to be performant when you have large sites? Is this actually going to scale with what we need it to do? And really, even more important than all of those, is this code secure? If I run this plugin on my site, is my site going to be hacked tomorrow? Is it going to go down? Is it going to be defaced? Is somebody going to start stealing customer information because I've installed an insecure plugin? So this presentation is about writing secure code. There are many more security topics we could go over, just that don't fit within the scope here. Here we're talking about writing code. We could also cover securing your server, securing your admin interface, WordPress config, but our focus today is going to be on what you can do when you're writing your plugins, when you're writing your themes, to protect yourself against some well-known security vulnerabilities. So the basic principle is trust no one. That means don't trust your users, don't trust your administrators, don't trust the public, don't trust other developers, don't even trust yourself. Why? Well, your users, they might be well-intentioned, but just completely incompetent and somehow manage to submit magical information that's going to break your site. Or maybe their computer has been hijacked and it's being used as part of a botnet to help bring down your site. And of course, you might actually have malicious visitors visiting your site trying to hack into it. The key with any sort of information users ever submit to your site is clean it up. Sanitize it, validate it, escape it. The idea here is that since you can't trust it, you need to clean it up so that it is data that you can reliably use. A basic principle of that is clean it up as late as you possibly can. In some ways, it seems kind of counterintuitive. You want to have clean data from the get-go, but at the same time, so long as you are making sure that you're escaping things as late as possible, that means that you're not going to forget to escape it because you're not going to assume that somewhere earlier along, some other code took care of it for you. So when you're outputting data to the browser, right when you're echoing it is the time to escape your data. When you're putting data into the database, right when you're running your SQL query is the time to clean up your data. And it's a principle you sometimes have to violate just for performance reasons. Maybe you have a very expensive validation routine that maybe you need to do earlier on and run it once instead of perhaps on every page of it. But as a general rule, as late as possible, clean up your data and present it to the user or to the database, wherever it needs to go in the clean format at that point. And really get to know the life cycle of your data. If any information ever came from a user through a form or something, when it goes into the database and you get it back out, you need to know, was it cleaned up before it went into the database? So you actually do kind of need to get to know your code, figure out where that data has lived, what other code has acted on it, so you know how clean it is at this point. And if you're in doubt, clean it up. You can have problems anywhere that a user is submitting data to your website, and data can come in a lot of different ways. Things to suspect are form inputs, of course. That's one of the standard ways users submit information. A URL is really the exact same thing as a form input. Just instead of a post request, it's a GET request. But everything in the URL is still user-submitted information. Cookies are user-submitted. Even though you can set the cookies on the server side, it's actually still managed on the client. And so the client can modify their cookies. They can send you malicious data inside of their cookies. HTTP headers. Cookies are one of those, but there are many HTTP headers that if you're using any of them, those are submitted by the client, not from your own server, so you can't trust them. any data you're getting from an external API is not trustworthy. Well, first of all, you don't even know what they've done on their side to sanitize the data. It may have been submitted by a malicious user on their end, unsanitized, and it's going to you. Or it could be that they've been hacked, or it could just be that they're giving you the data exactly as they intend to, but it's not cleaned up yet for presenting to the user at that point. So you still need to know what's the life cycle of that data, what do you need to do with it to present it cleanly to the user. You can even get suspect data from your database. If something has made it into your database, that doesn't mean it's been cleaned up. When you're getting data back out, you need to make sure that it is clean data that you can work with. You can get bad data from apply filters. Anytime that another plugin is interacting with your code, it can lead to malformed or maybe the other it can be malformed data, or maybe the other plugin had a security vulnerability in it, and so now it's causing problems for your plugin. Any plugin you write is not going to run in a vacuum. It's working probably with many other plugins on the WordPress install, and so you need to actually be conscious that as soon as you're allowing those other plugins access to your data, then you might have bad data coming back out. And this is especially why you need to be escaping your data as late as possible. That you let it go through everything it needs to do first, and then you escape the data before you output it and put it into your database. And it's rare, but you can even get bad data from translations, especially if it's a third-party translation for your plugin. If you're not actually reviewing what's coming in there, then you can't be confident that that is secure data that's not going to cause some sort of script injection or something on your site. You have to be reasonable about the security trade-offs that you make, because everything you do to be more secure is also going to have a performance hit on your site. But generally speaking, you can take reasonable measures to clean up every bit of data that you're working with. So when you're echoing data, clean it up after it comes back from translation. When you're installing your database, to escape the data after it comes back out. Now I'm going to talk about a few major classes of security vulnerabilities. First one we're going to mention is the SQL injection. SQL injection is basically allowing a user to submit data whereby they execute an arbitrary query against your database. Here in the classic XKCD cartoon, you have little Bobby Tables who, when his name is put into a database, it causes the entire students table to drop because they didn't sanitize their database inputs. And that really is a possible consequence of not escaping your database inputs, because once the user can run arbitrary queries on your database, they can do really anything they want in it. Let's give an example of how that can show up in your code. Say you were running a query here where you have a form where a user can update or put in their name. So Bobby Tables can put in his name here, and you're running update WP users, set display name equals, and then you're getting the data from the form, the post new name, where ID is the current user's ID. If you're naive, you'll look at that and think, oh, what's the worst case? A user can maybe put in the wrong name for themselves, and then they could go fix it again with the form. And so here's a simple request. We're running curl here, but it can be coming through a browser or whatever. And somebody puts in a friendly new name, and that's the query we expect. Update WP users, set display name equals beneficent, where ID equals 3. Now, what if instead of somebody just putting in their name, they give you a string like this: new name equals maleficent, quote, comma, user pass equals ABCDEFG, where ID equals 1 dash dash. That dash dash at the end is a SQL comment, which means this is the query that ends up running against your database. Update WP users, set display name equals maleficent, user password equals ABCDEFG, where ID equals 1, which means they probably just changed the password on your administrator user. To clean up this data, WordPress provides a number of helpful functions to you. The first one to get to know is WPD prepare. And here, instead of putting these data directly into our query, you can see here that We are using the printf format, so we have a %s here and a %d here. And then we actually add 2 extra parameters to it. So the first is the new name, and the second is the current user ID. And WPD prepare will take that, escape it so that it will go into the database cleanly. So if they put in that full malicious string as their display name, it just sets their display name to that string. One thing to note with WPD prepare is you don't actually need to put quotes around any of your placeholders, because WordPress will take care of that for you. Even better than prepare when you're making an update statement is WPD update. You don't even have to write your own SQL. You just tell it the table, you tell it which fields you're updating, and you tell it what conditions you need for updating it and how to format that data. In addition to WPD prepare, there are a number of other functions you can work with to escape your data. Escape like is a helpful method for anytime you're going to do a like query. For example, if you're doing a free text search and so you are just looking for a particular keyword within your data, you'll probably be using escape like or something of the sort. Escape by ref is really what's going on inside the internals of WPD prepare. And this is basically taking all of the variables that you give it and escaping them so that they can go inside of quotes. Escape SQL is a slightly more generic function. Pretty much what it does is add slashes in front of quotes for you. It's not necessarily a cure-all. You can't just give it any SQL and assume that it's going to be clean after it comes back from that. There was a big vulnerability recently when a plugin was using Escape SQL, but it wasn't for something that was supposed to be going inside quotes, and it still led to an SQL injection vulnerability. Also, get to know your CRUD functions, so insert, update, and delete. And these 3 methods make it so that you don't even have to be writing your own SQL queries. And wherever possible, make sure that you just have a whitelist of data. If you don't need the user to be able to submit any arbitrary string, if they're just, say, selecting from a few different fields to sort on, just pick from that whitelist and don't allow the user's actual input to be used for the query. You don't need to check in an order by clause for whatever value the user gave you for order by. Check if it's ASC and it's a semi, and if it's not, then it's descending. And don't ever use the user's actual string in the database query. There is a page in the WordPress Codex that describes all of these and many more data validation functions. The page is aptly named Data Validation. The next vulnerability we're going to talk about is the Crosssite Request Forgery, CSRF. That was my tree. It fell on my neighbor's house. So a Crosssite Request Forgery is basically you're visiting a website. That site does something that causes your browser to make a request to your own site that it basically hooks onto your authenticated session on your own site in order to do something malicious. And it could be that the other site you're visiting is actually just like comments or something on your own site. So an example of this, let's say you have a simple form. We had our user earlier set their display name. Now they're going to set their password. And so a very simple form, we just have a hidden field where we're saying that the action is set password, and then a password field for them to put their password in. Many of you are probably cringing right now seeing this form, knowing all of the things that can go wrong with that. And here's the code that we have running on the back end handling that. If action is set password and password's not empty, then WP set password to the current. So what can go wrong with that? Let's say somebody manages to get into a comment on your website. Image. Source equals example. Equals set password, and password equals ABCDEFG. Your browser doesn't know that that's not an image URL. And so you load a page that has that comment in it. You're logged in as an administrator, and your browser dutifully loads that URL, which your code is going to set your administrator password to ABCDEFG. Whoever put that comment in there now knows your administrator password, and you don't. The way to get around this is to use what's called a nonce. It stands for a number used only once, and this is basically a small cryptographic token, just a few essentially random characters. It's a hash that is based on the current user, their current session, so their IP address, where they're logged in from, and then also an arbitrary action that you can define in your form. So using the nonce is pretty simple. In our same form, you can see that we're setting, using a bit of PHP here to use the function WP nonce field. And then set password is the arbitrary string we're giving it, basically as a seed for the hash that it generates. And that's going to output a couple of extra hidden fields into our form that we can use in a few minutes to validate it. Another tiny security thing we did here was change the request method to post instead of get. That's going to make it so, at the very least, an image URL isn't going to be able to cause this forged request. And it doesn't completely protect you, but using post, at least instead of get, helps a little bit. And so now, when we're handling this, again, notice we're using post instead of get to check for our values. And we're using this function check admin refer. This is going to check that a valid nonce was submitted, and it being check admin refer is also checking to make sure that it came from another admin page on your site. And so that nonce is going to verify that you in fact submitted the form and that this is a valid submission. Nobody tricked you into doing it with a hidden URL or something like that. So always use nonces on any sort of user action that you want to perform. It doesn't matter how basic. If you're not using a nonce, then essentially any user's action can be hijacked by somebody else with a cross-site request forgery. There's a few basic functions to use for creating nonces. The first, aptly named, is WP create nonce. That's going to just give you that basic string. And if you're planning on using it in a form, then go with WP nonce field. That puts it in a hidden input field within your form. If you'd rather have it in a URL, say that you're giving them a link to click on to perform an action, maybe you're putting in an email or something, then go with WP nonce URL. One thing to note about all of these is that a nonce is only valid for 24 hours. Within WordPress, you could actually even filter that to make it shorter or longer as you prefer using the nonce life filter. But so any nonce that you generate with this, it's going to expire eventually. And so a user will have to refresh the form or whatever they're using to get a new nonce, so that even in the unlikely event that somebody actually hijacks their session somehow and still has gets their IP address, that will at least eventually expire. And then there's a few methods also for verifying nonces. WP verify nonce is aptly named because you're verifying a nonce, and so you just give it the nonce value and the action that you're working with, and it will compare the hash that you give it with the hash that it would create now. If you have an admin form, you would want to use check admin refer, and similarly with an Ajax form, check Ajax refer. And both of those, in addition to verifying the nonce, are also verifying a hidden referrer field that was put into the form to make sure that the request is coming from a page that you expect the request to be coming from. There's a delightful article about nonces on CSS tricks called WordPress Front-End Security, CSRF, and nonces. You can read that for more information about what cross-site request forgeries are and how to use nonces in your plugins. Okay. Last one I want to talk about is cross-site scripting. We would call it CSS, but that was taken, so it's XSS. And at least in my experience, cross-site scripting is far more destructive than either of the other two we've talked about before. Not that any of them can't completely compromise your site, but cross-site scripting seems to be one of the most effective ways for an attacker to actually break into your site and do whatever they want to do with it. Basically it's like a spore of mold that gets into your bread, and give it a moment and all of your bread is covered in mold and you don't want to eat it anymore. That was from my Halloween film, the background. So, an example, you have a plugin that's going to make a dashboard widget. It's going to show the 5 most popular URLs that people visit on your site. And so, within your dashboard widget, you have a function that gets you that list of URLs. You output them in an unordered list. Really simple code. Now, what happens if one of your most visited URLs looks like this? Here's your domain and request equals, oh, we have a script tag inside of our query string there. So as soon as you load this in your admin, that script is going to run. You're an administrator on your site, and so that script is running as if it is the administrator. It can do whatever it wants on your site. This is really easy to work around using this function, escape URL. You have the exact same code, just wrap around your URL, this function escape URL, and it's going to clean up things that shouldn't be invalid URLs, and you end up with just the escaped tags displaying on your admin instead of an actual malicious script running. WordPress has a whole bunch of functions for escaping data, depending on where that data is going to be going. Escape URL, we already mentioned, will clean up a URL. If you're outputting the user's input as HTML, then escape HTML is free. That will basically convert any HTML tags into entities, so that you just see your angle brackets on the page instead of having actual HTML. Strip tags is a built-in PHP function that goes beyond that and just completely strips those HTML tags out of the content. Escape attribute is for putting things inside the attributes of an element, so make sure that any quotes are properly escaped, for example. And escape text area similarly works inside of a text area field to escape whatever value you're putting there. You'll be especially using escape attribute and escape text area when you're displaying forms to a user, so that you can repopulate them with default values or whatever values the users had previously put in, and you escape them to put in the attributes into the text areas of that form. Escape.js if you're putting a string into JavaScript somewhere on the page. And WordPress has a few functions. I have no idea how you pronounce KSES, kisses, whatever. In any case, it stands for Kissy Stops Evil Scripts. Or Kissy Strips Evil Scripts, rather. And basically what this does is you can give it a whitelist of HTML tags and even the attributes that you allow within those HTML tags, and it will strip out everything except those things that you have whitelisted. So for example, WP Kissy's posts runs on the post content whenever an editor of your site is submitting content, and that will strip out any tags that aren't allowed in the post content, which often includes script tags, style tags, that sort of thing. And then WP Kissy's data is going to run on comments. And so you have that smaller subset. For example, in comments, maybe they can use a code tag or an emphasis tag or something like that, but really nothing else. And so that's a smaller subset. And WP Kissy's the overriding function there. You can give it any arbitrary list of tags and attributes that you're willing to allow to escape data for whatever is appropriate for what you're displaying. Again, I'm referencing this data validation page in the WordPress Codex. There are so many functions there that you can read about for escaping the data in all of the various contexts where users might be submitting malicious data. So at this point, it is time for a demonstration. And I have to go sit over there because the computer doesn't reach this far. And I'm going to show you how an attacker can take over your site with a Crosssite script. So, here we have a basic WordPress install. This is running 2015. We're on WordPress 4.4 beta. And we have one plugin running on here, one malicious plugin, or one vulnerable plugin rather. So let me show you how that works. So the basics here, this is the example I just gave you earlier. We're making a dashboard widget that shows the most popular URLs on your site. This is just an example, so we're just hard coding in what those URLs are here. But a real plugin would probably be getting those URLs from, say, Google Analytics or some sort of tracking it does itself and is storing them in your database. And so you're getting back a list of URLs. And you can see here, these URLs aren't escaped, and one of them looks like it has some malicious data in here. The reason I'm using this example is because this was a major vulnerability affecting a popular analytics plugin recently, that they had a dashboard script that an attacker could actually get a script tag to display in your dashboard just by visiting a URL a lot so that it shows up in the top 5 list. So here's our dashboard widget class, and you can see we get the URLs and we just echo them out in a list. It's just like the example I showed you earlier. So let's look at what that actual exploit file has in it. Let's see if our internet works here. Okay, so there's just a few basic functions in here just for performing HTTP operations, so a GET request, a POST request. And what is this going to do? It's going to first grab the plugin editor page. You all know that page where you can edit files in your theme and your plugins in the WordPress admin. It's going to load that and find the nonce value inside of that page. WordPress, of course, is very good about using nonces, but at this point, since the script is running as you, it can make a background AJAX request to get the page and get a current nonce for you. And now that it has that nonce, it's going to submit malicious data, all of this base 64 stuff, base 64 encoded stuff that we have here at the bottom. It's going to submit all of that into the plugin editor, basically replacing, in our case, Hello Dolly, the delightful plugin that everybody happens to have on their site. And so it's a wonderful target for an attacker to just replace that file. And once it's replaced it, it's going to load it, which is probably going to start up a remote shell and notify a command and control server that your site is now theirs. So let's look at our WordPress admin, see what this does. And just for clarity, here is our current hello.php. So exactly as Matt intended it to be. Now, let's go here, load up our WordPress dashboard. And it's too late. Our site has been hacked. Let's go back and look at our code. Look what happened to hello.php. Everything that was there is gone. It's a hacked file. And so the script did just what I told you. It submitted 3 AJAX requests in the background. 1, to get the nonce. 2, to update the plugin file. And 3, to just notify whoever wrote that script that this site has now been hacked. So basically, once the site has been infected with a Crosssite script, everything's destroyed. You restore from a backup, and you basically lost everything that's happened since your last backup. Because once they've gotten in there, they've probably added dozens of other vulnerabilities everywhere in your code. So you need to delete it all, probably delete all of your uploads and restore everything from your latest backup because your site is completely compromised. So here are a few resources you can look at. OWASP.org, the Open Web Application Security Project. I think I saw somebody with that shirt walking around earlier. It's basically a resource to learn about all of the various classes of vulnerabilities, how they can be introduced into your code and how you can fight against them. And then several pages in the WordPress Codex. You can find the page about data validation we've mentioned earlier, validating, sanitizing, and escaping user data. And the page Hardening WordPress is not so much about cleaning up data in your plugin, but about if you are the site administrator or you're building the site, what you can do when you're setting up the site to help prevent some of these vulnerabilities. For example, if you set the disallow file edits constant, then that attack we just showed you wouldn't work because you can't, even as an administrator, edit files through the UI. There are a lot of things you can do both from an administrator level and from a systems level. So a good web host is going to block a lot of these attacks. But really, as plugin and theme authors, it is our responsibility to make sure that whatever environment your plugin is running in, that it is not going to introduce these vulnerabilities and introduce an avenue for your client's sites to be attacked. So my name is Jonathan Brinley. These slides are available at flightlist.us/WCORL 2015. And I'm available for questions. Yes. In my opinion, backing up should be an automatic process that you never have to think about, just because you want them to be regular, at least daily, if not more often, because you never know when somebody's going to hack into your site, and you want to be able to restore things. And for that matter, you never know when an administrator is just going to accidentally restore things. So for so many reasons, you want to have current backups. FTP copies will, of course, get whatever you're doing at the time when you do it, but and of course you also want to have a database backup, because once they've gotten into your site, then they can also do anything they want with your database. I don't recommend any in particular plugins. There are several out there. They do wonderful things, and really, if you're on a good web host, they should be doing it for you too. Yes, if I have any thoughts on using admin Ajax and any pitfalls with it. If you're in the admin and you're doing Ajax things, it seems like the right tool. If you are working with the front end of your site, WordPress has a delightful REST API coming in, and so I recommend that for doing Ajax-y things on the front end, start learning how to use that. Yeah. Yeah, there are many vulnerability scanners, and I've experimented with them. Everyone I've worked with gives so many false positives as to not really be useful. At Modern Tribe on our events calendar, usually about once a week, we have somebody submitting something to us saying, I found a vulnerability in your plugin, because they use one of those tools. It said it found a vulnerability. There's really nothing there. You can use them. It might be a great place to start for your plugin, but you actually need to take what they say with a grain of salt. It might not be accurate, and it's not going to catch everything either. Oh, yeah. So in your WP config file, there is a constant you can define. It's disallow _file _edits. And once you have that set, it just completely removes the editor section from the WordPress admin. It disables those pages so that you can't actually edit files there. And I highly recommend that for many reasons, among them being the security issues, but also if you're building a site for a client, you don't want them going and messing with the code that you wrote either. They're probably going to do it wrong. Well, tomorrow, I believe we have a security panel, so if you have more questions, you can come and talk with me, Topher, Frank, and Chris, and we would all be delighted to answer your security questions.